South Korean officials will push their American counterparts to pressure Japan to remove its export curbs on South Korea. They say the restrictions will hurt US firms as much as they harm companies here. Stocks on Wall Street hit record highs as the head of the Federal Reserve cements his case for cutting interest rates. The expected rate reduction will happen later this month. Plus, a diplomatic slap in the face to Seoul. The US-led UN command that helps protect the Korean peninsula is reportedly planning to add Japan as an official member. Our top story this morning, senior South Korean officials are in Washington amid the country's escalating trade tensions with Japan. They want the US to use its sizable influence over Japan to urge it to change course. Now, Tokyo has imposed heavily restrictive trade control measures on Seoul that many watchers say are likely to hurt other global IT giants, including those based in the US, as much as they harm South Korean companies. Our Oh Soo-young starts us off.
South Korea's Deputy National Security Advisor Kim Yeon-dong is in Washington to discuss major trade and security issues with his US counterparts. The trip comes amid growing regional trade tensions after Japan imposed unprecedented export curbs on key high-tech components bound for South Korea. Speaking to reporters at Dallas International Airport on Wednesday local time before transferring planes for Washington, Kim confirmed the trade spat will be one of the main topics of discussion.
I'm here as there are many issues to discuss with White House officials and lawmakers. That issue will certainly be discussed, most definitely.
Seoul's top diplomat for bilateral economic affairs Kim Il-sang is also in Washington to meet his counterpart Roland de Marcellus of the US State Department. He will also sit down with Mark Napper, the State Department's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Korea and Japan, to discuss matters of mutual interest. Kim is expected to explain the potential impact of Tokyo's controversial trade measures and the possible spillover effect on global businesses. South Korean companies produce 3/4 of the world's DRAM chips, about half of 3D NAND semiconductors, and the lion's share of OLED displays, which are used by other global IT giants such as US-based firms Apple and Dell. The South Korean officials are likely to ask Washington to defuse the trade spat before it escalates even further. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Now, the new US Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs is starting his first overseas trip since assuming the role last month. David Stilwell is touring Asia, and his trip takes him to South Korea and Japan as they remain at odds over Tokyo's exports curbs. Stilwell will be in Tokyo from Thursday until Sunday. He'll arrive in Seoul next Wednesday. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, his boss, says he's looking forward to working closely with Stilwell in leading many crucial partnerships throughout the region. The State Department has been keen to avoid the impression Stilwell is taking sides between South Korea and Japan. Seoul's Foreign Affairs Minister Kang Kyung-hwa and Pompeo spoke over the phone just hours ago, where they discussed Japan's export restrictions on South Korea. So this devastating trade spat between South Korea and Japan really does put Seoul in a sticky situation. But it has encouraged officials here to make the country more self-reliant when it comes to cutting-edge technology and the development of it. In the first of 3 special reports on Japan's export curbs, Kim Hae-sung puts the spotlight on Seoul's more than 50-year trade deficit with Tokyo.
South Korea has traditionally enjoyed a large current account surplus, with exports accounting for half of its GDP, but it has posted a trade deficit against Japan for more than 5 decades. According to the Korea International Trade Association, Korea has recorded a total deficit of more than $600 billion against Japan since the two began bilateral trade in 1965 following the normalization of diplomatic ties. In 1965, the trade deficit was at $130 million, which increased to around $20 billion in recent years after hitting a record $36 billion in 2010. Last year, trade deficit with Japan was tallied at $24 billion, higher than Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, which mainly export oil to South Korea. High-tech products are the biggest source of the deficit against Japan, with semiconductors and chip-making equipment accounting for more than a third. Chemical products and plastics topped $2.5 billion in the first 5 months through May this year, which include photoresist and etching gas, items used to produce chips and displays that Japan imposed export restrictions on last week.
Korean conglomerates have invested capital to diversify their final goods. Smaller firms invested in parts, but not as much in high-tech materials that require huge amounts of R&D and time. So although Korean companies have become strong in semiconductors and smartphone products, they have relied heavily on high-tech materials imported from Japan and the US.
Seoul's key exports to Tokyo are mainly petrochemical goods, semiconductors, and auto parts. They totaled $2.6 billion in the first 5 months of the year, but unlike fluorine polyamide, etching gas, and photoresist that Japan holds a dominant global market share in, those goods are relatively easy to source from countries other than Korea. The South Korean government announced last week that it would invest $850 million a year in semiconductors parts and materials, but cooperation between conglomerates and smaller companies to invest and research in new materials and high-tech equipment is viewed to be more important in the long run. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
The US-led United Nations command is reportedly seeking to include Japan in the states that would be involved militarily if an armed conflict broke out on the Korean peninsula. South Korean media cited multiple government sources Thursday as saying the US has been seeking to increase UNC's role in the region using troops and equipment from UNC's rear base in Japan. The implications are not yet clear, but even a hint of Japan getting involved militarily on the Korean peninsula will add to the tensions between South Korea and Japan. Also, for the first time, US forces Korea, in an annual publication called Strategic Digest, have referred to Japan's military involvement, saying UN command, quote, continues to ensure the support and force flow through Japan that would be necessary in times of crisis. And US forces in South Korea have, for the very first time, publicly acknowledged that North Korea has a missile that can reach any part of the US mainland. It's called the Hwasong-15 ICBM. The USFK Strategic Digest 2019, published Thursday, says the Hwasong-15 can fly up to 13,000 kilometers, putting the entire US mainland in range. Its predecessor, the Hwasong-14, can reach most of it with a range of more than 10,000 kilometers. In terms of the North's complete denuclearization, the report stressed there's still a lot of work to do, though Kim Jong-un has ordered his nuclear missile sites dismantled. It added Kim has not made policy decisions that would lead to sanctions relief or foreign investments. Switching gears now, and the first US interest rate cut in 10 years is likely to happen in the coming weeks. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell has pledged to act as appropriate to defend US economic expansion against a challenging international backdrop. Powell also brushed aside President Trump's recent criticisms of his leadership of the Fed, saying he wouldn't resign even if Trump demanded he go. Lee Seung-jae reports.
Testifying before the U.S. House Committee on Financial Services on Wednesday, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell vowed to steer the strong U.S. economy through a fraught road of international trade spats and a global slowdown.
The economy performed reasonably well over the first half of 2019, and the current expansion is now in its 11th year. However, inflation has been running below the FOMC's symmetric 2% objective, and cross-currents, such as trade tensions and concerns about global growth, have been weighing on economic activity and the outlook.
With that, Powell strongly hinted that a rate cut is coming down the line later this month. If it happens, it will be the Fed's first cut in a decade. After Powell's announcement, the Dow rallied on Wednesday, and the S&P 500 crossed the 3,000-point mark for the first time in history. Meanwhile, brushing aside repeated criticism from President Trump, Powell insisted he will not step down even if Trump asked him to resign. The Fed chief stressed that the law guarantees him a 4-year term and he fully intends to serve it out. But President Trump still appears to have got what he wanted, namely a rate cut. Trump has long insisted lower rates will help the U.S. economy grow even faster as he prepares to try and win re-election in 2020. 이승재, Arirang News.
Now, diplomats gathered in Vienna on Wednesday for an emergency meeting of the International Atomic Energy Agency. That was requested by the United States to discuss Iran's nuclear program. However, little of substance was actually accomplished on Wednesday. For more on this and other news from around the world, let's turn to our Hong Yu. So give us the details.
Sure. At an emergency meeting on Iran's breach of the 2015 nuclear deal, a U.S. envoy said Iran's expansion of its nuclear program is an attempt to financially extort the international community. However, the U.S. statement emphasized that the U.S. is still open for talks with Iran without preconditions. While this meeting was taking place in Vienna, U.S. President Donald Trump accused Iran of secretly enriching uranium for a long time and warned U.S. sanctions will soon be strengthened. The IAEA had verified Iran's compliance with the nuclear accord until earlier this week, when it confirmed that Tehran had exceeded the stockpile of enriched uranium regulated under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Iran's envoy told reporters after the meeting that if the U.S. wants to talk, it should lift sanctions.
No country is ready to negotiate with a country that is putting the gun on its chest. So America is maximizing the pressures, extending the areas of sanctions on a daily basis, and simultaneously requesting and claiming that I'm ready to negotiate with Iran.
The stance of the other parties to the deal, Russia, China, Germany, France, Britain, and the EU, varied, and the meeting failed to draw a unified conclusion, as Russia and China said the U.S. had breached the deal by pulling out and imposing sanctions on Iran. Apart from the U.S. and Iran, all parties concluded it's best for them to remain committed to preserving the 2015 deal. Bringing out the ticker tape, the U.S. women's national soccer team celebrated their World Cup victory in New York City on Wednesday, joined by fans tossing confetti and chanting equal pay. Their victory casts fresh light on the women's team's fight for equal pay with their male counterparts. If the U.S. men's team won the World Cup, each player would receive 10 times as much as their female counterparts were awarded after they lifted the trophy. The women's team has been fighting for this issue for months. They filed a lawsuit against the U.S. Soccer Federation in March over unequal pay. Venezuela's monthly inflation rate dropped for the second straight month in June, but the annual rate remains well over 400,000%. The latest rate nearly halved from over 800,000% in May. According to an opposition lawmaker Wednesday, workers' salaries are still not nearly enough to cover the rising costs of consumer goods and the collapsing South American economy. The official minimum wage is 40,000 bolivars a month, equivalent to less than $6 US.
Thank you to Hong Yu there for the world news. Now, South Korea's National Assembly will hold its third and final interpellation session this afternoon. The focus is going to be on culture, education and social issues facing South Korea. Lawmakers are likely to grill government officials on the Moon administration's labor reforms and its healthcare policies. The controversy surrounding so-called autonomous private high schools is also expected to come up. The schools set their own curriculum and admission standards, but Seoul's education authorities recently decided to strip some of them of their special status. The Seoul Metropolitan Government is implementing stronger measures to keep vulnerable social groups cool during the scorching summer heat. The city advises people to stay indoors when heatwave warnings or alerts are issued and make use of the capital's 26 cooling shelters. Now, these shelters have air conditioning units, shower rooms, and even TVs. 3 mobile bath vehicles for homeless people will operate in 5 areas. Nurses will do daily checkups on homeless people and those over 65, the disabled or those suffering from a chronic disease. Private companies will also sponsor free drinking water, food and electric fans. Time now for our Life and Info segment where we focus on information we do hope will be useful for your everyday life. It is Thursday, so we are going to focus on culture and the arts here in South Korea. To walk us through some of the events worth checking out, I'm happy to say we have our Min-sun joining us in the studio. So hello Min-sun, and what do you have for us today?
Hi Mark, before I start, I would like to ask you, what do you usually do after work?
Well, I start work very early, so I finish early. So I either pick my 2 kids up from school, I might go to the gym, do some much needed exercise. I also sometimes go and get some acupuncture to relax myself. But in regards to evening activities, I'm generally pretty quiet, just go to bed early.
Oh, I see.
What about you?
For me, if I get off work early, I sometimes go and catch a movie or take in a performance. But as everyone knows, movies or performances can take at least a couple of hours. That means if you leave work at 6 or 7 p.m. and spend about an hour having dinner, it's easily 8 p.m. by the time the movie or performance starts.
That's true.
Meaning that you might not get home until 11 p.m. or even midnight.
Especially these days, sometimes the movies last like over 3 hours sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it can be exhausting, no matter how interesting the content is. So, and of course, we have to go to work early the next day. So I'm going to introduce some shorter programs that only last an hour or so for those of us who want to enjoy some culture but don't want to be wiped out at work the next day. The Seoul Arts Center in southern Seoul has an artist lounge program every last Wednesday of the month. This 70-minute classical music performance is a good option for those who want some refreshment after a long day at the office. It's mainly classical music, but it also includes more popular music pieces from musicals and jazz genres. The performance starts at 8 p.m. and runs without an intermission. What makes this program even more accessible is the cheap admission charge. It's only 10,000 won per person, less than $9, which is the same or less than a cinema ticket.
For many people, the Seoul Arts Center is not an easy place to visit, so we've shortened the performance time to about an hour, and we present various genres from classical, jazz, and Korean traditional music. Our audience members were mostly housewives or people who lived nearby when Artist Lounge was held in the morning. It was a difficult time for people with jobs. Now a lot more office workers are coming to enjoy the performances without feeling too pressured.
I often come to the Seoul Arts Center. The performance starts at 8 p.m., so there's plenty of time for me to get here, even after work.
We both work and try to enjoy cultural events as often as we can. Having a shorter performance time is great for office workers, since we have to worry about going to work the next day. It ends fairly early, and I can enjoy the performance without getting bored.
Kind of seems like he was dragged along there by his girlfriend and would have preferred to be watching Spider-Man in the cinema or something. But for people watching at home, when is the next artist lounge performance actually happening?
So the next performance is on Wednesday, July 24th, and it will be a piano quartet presenting familiar tunes like Romeo and Juliet and Swan Lake. And more performances are lined up through the end of the year. So if you can make, in case if you can make that one, you can have more to catch up.
Yeah, so it's going to be held once every month. But considering that it's only held on the final Wednesday of the month. Some people might not be able to make that. So are there any other of these short, compact cultural performances we can enjoy here in Seoul?
Sure, a social venue, the Laum, located in Gangnam, also provides this 1 hour-long music program specifically designed for office workers in their 20s and 30s. And their soirée program, which means evening party or gathering in French, is titled A Cup of Music on the Way Home from Work. The concert starts at 8 p.m. on every third Thursday of the month. A nice touch is that if you arrive early, you can enjoy a free drink at the outdoor cafe. The concert consists of various music genres such as cinema music, jazz, bossa nova, and electronic. The next performance is set for Thursday, July 18th, and it will present bossa nova, a music genre that combines Brazilian samba and jazz.
Well, I must admit that looks rather nice, the cafe setting. It would be nice in the summer as well, providing we don't have any monsoon rain. Might be worth checking out if that's what you're interested in looking for, and the admission is cheap and lots of young people there. Perhaps you can meet people of similar interests and make some new friends. Now, in regards to, we've spoken about musical kind of performances. So if you're not really interested in listening to music but want to try something else out just to relax yourself at a long day at the office, what other kinds of cultural events are being held in Seoul?
Yes, there are contemporary dance performances coming up next week and in August that are presented for about 60 minutes. Contemporary dance performance Swing will have its second show in August at Seoul Arts Center. The rhythm and energy of swing music is expressed through modern dance moves. Visitors can enjoy 17 swing jazz songs, including some well-known ones like In the Mood, Mac the Knife, and Sing Sing Sing. From July 19th to 21st, the Korea National Contemporary Dance Company presents Sang Sang, a new piece by a Spanish choreographer. These dance performances are being presented for 3 days only, so make sure to mark your calendar if you don't want to miss it.
Okay, so July 19th to the 21st, so that's coming up very, very soon, and it's only over a limited period. If you have been watching this and want to check out any of those events, you can Google them or go into Naver. Might be a better idea to check out exactly where and when all these performances will be held. As always, Min-sun, it's always a pleasure to have you, and thank you for coming in and sharing the information.
Yep, thank you.
Well, that was nice. Now we're going to take a look at some other cultural events that are coming up right here in Korea.
Good morning. A monsoon front dropped heavy showers on Korea's upper regions overnight, but most of the rain clouds have passed over the peninsula, and showers will let up today for most parts of the country. However, Gangwon province and its mountainous regions will continue to see relatively heavy showers until early Friday, with heavy rain alerts still in place. So if you're there, take precautions and please stay safe. Temperatures will be on the comfortable side, hovering in the mid to upper 20s in most regions, while southern provinces will have higher readings than yesterday. And for a closer look, Gwangju will get up to 28 degrees Celsius. Busan will be topping out at 27 degrees this afternoon. Now, frequent showers are in the forecast nationwide through early next week. So, it's always best to keep an umbrella handy at this time of year. That's Korea for you, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's all we have for now on this Thursday morning here in Seoul. Do stay tuned to us on Arirang TV. Plenty more coming up, including our next newscast. That's happening at noon Korea time in around an hour and a half from now with our very own Lee Ji-yoon. So until then, goodbye.